Okay, students, in this video we're going to look at using Quixel to make a more realistic looking landscape material. I know I used one in some of the earlier videos, but it has sort of a early video game feel and doesn't look especially realistic. And Quixel Bridge, being built into Unreal Engine 5, lets us get some really realistic materials quite easily. So here I'm logged into Bridge. I've done a search for surfaces, rock, cliff. And medium quality should be fine for me here. I'm going to go ahead and click download. And once I have downloaded it, I'm going to click add, which is going to add it to my content. And I've actually previously downloaded a bunch, so I'm going to go to my local surfaces. And I'm just going to click the blue arrow, which is going to add some of the rest of these. So I have this. This is like grass, rocky grass. So I'm going to add that. And this is like rocky dirt. So I'm going to add that. And finally, I'm going to use this like cracked dirt. So now I have a grass, a cliff, and two different dirts. And so we can see them here. Rocky soil, and a bunch of other ones that I've used previously in this file. So what I want to do, I'm going to go ahead in this situation and make a new folder for this, and call it my terrain folder. And inside here, I'm going to create a new material. And I'm going to call it terrain master. You could call it Landscape Master, you could call it whatever. I think I have some previous versions in here, so I'm going with terrain, but something that describes what it's for. And then we're going to double click to open it up. So in here, we're going to get started. And one of the cool things that we can do here is I'm going to switch this because it's going to be a bunch of things used together. So instead of trying to have a switcher to send it all into here, I'm going to choose this little box right here that says Use Material Attributes. I'm going to turn that on, and it's going to make our export just a single channel. And then I'm going to right-click and create what is called a Landscape Layer Blend, which also only has one, which lines up really nicely. Now, it's going to get mad at us here because we don't have any inputs yet. So on our layer blend selected, we have our details here, and I can add some elements, which is going to give me some left side inputs here. Now, I downloaded 4 materials, so I'm going to hit it 4 times, which gives me here an index 0 through 3. So I'm going to go ahead and name these, and you want whatever is your index 0 to be the one that is going to be like the default. So for me, that's going to be rocky grass. And I'm going to go ahead and type that in the layer name, and we will be able to see it here. It is a weight blend, and because this is index 1, I'm going to give it a preview weight of 1, which means it's going to default to showing us this material if nothing else is true. So I'm going to go ahead and open my other indexes and put names in there. And this one, I'm going to choose the cliff. And then on the next one, I'm going to choose... What did I have? I had rocky grass, cliff, I had rocky dirt, and finally I had like cracked mud. And on the next 3, instead of a LB weight blend, I'm going to switch it to an LB height blend. And we'll come back to the reason why on that in a bit. Notice as I switch it to height blend, the later materials here are getting 2 inputs. They have a height and a layer, layer and height information. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come like way up here, and I'm going to open my content drawer, and I'm going to look for that rocky soil ground material. Here it is. So this is the material, and these are the 3 pieces that make it up. Now, if we were to open this material, because it's Quixel, it's going to have the Quixel master material, and it's going to have a bunch of stuff going on in there. But we're just interested in the textures that make it up, and there are 3 here. We have the _D texture, which is the diffuse, basically the base color. We have the _N texture, which is the normal map. And finally, we have the underscore ORD texture, which we'll talk about more in a second. So I'm going to line them up like I would in 3D Studio Max. And then I'm going to have here a make material attributes, which will look familiar. It has all of our inputs, and it has a nice little output here. So if I zoom in, the diffuse will go into base color. The normal will go into normal. And let's talk about what ORD stands for. So ORD, or an ORD map, is an occlusion, roughness, and displacement map all baked into one. So each of those types of maps is usually just a single black and white map, right? That tells us how rough something is or what its shadows are. And what they figured out is what you can do is you can take each of those black and white maps and instead make them a single channel on the red, the green, and the blue. So if I turn on just my red of this material, we get a really nice ambient occlusion, hence the O. So O is the first one, that's ambient occlusion. And then my G map, my green, is the R. So here's the roughness of this material. And you can see how it is rough, and you can see the different types of rocks popping up here. And finally, the B is our displacement map. And here we can see the black and white displacement map for displacing. Now, you all know displacement kind of doesn't work the same way it used to in Unreal 5, but we could use it for part of our height map, which we're going to come back to. So, back in here, instead of dragging off the RGB, we're going to drag off the R, which is our ORD map, and O goes into ambient occlusion. G for roughness will go into roughness. And for now, B will do nothing, because this is our default one, so it'll be our base, but the other ones we will do fun stuff with. Now, a good habit here would be to select all of them and press C to make a comment and call this like rocky grass. And this guy is going to go into the rocky grass material. Now, what you want to do is do this for all of your 4 materials. So I'm going to pause the video and pop them in right now. Okay, so I've got my 4 here. Here's the cliff, here is the dirt, and here is the mud. Each of them are connected to the 4 channels that we can use right now. Again, it's really hard to break the idea that R should go to roughness, but R is the ambient occlusion. Make sure G goes to roughness. And we're going to talk about what we're going to do with B right now. So I'm going to go to the first one that is not, I guess my second material. So the first height blend, which here I have a height cliff. And I'm going to drag off of blue on my ORD map. And I'm going to type cheap contrast, which is a useful node to do some contrast to it. And I'm going to right click on the word contrast and turn it into a parameter. Promote to a parameter. And I'm going to call that parameter height contrast. And this is useful because this is going to let us, when we make material instances of this, change this easily. So I'm going to set this default value to about 4. We'll play around with that later. And this cheap contrast is going to go into our height cliff. And over here, I hadn't connected my layer cliff yet. And as I go down here, I can keep using this cheap contrast node and parameter. So what I can do here is drag off of the B for rocky dirt, type cheap contrast. I can reuse this same parameter and then bring this one up to the height for rocky dirt, and also connect the make material attributes to the layer for rocky dirt. And finally do the last one here, cheap contrast, and drag this down here so I can get to it and connect it there. And connect this one up here to the height cracked mud, and then the layer here to the layer cracked mud. Okay, so we are most of the way there. There's a couple other things to do. One thing you can always do if you want to check to see stuff is you can preview the node at the make material attributes, and it'll show you what that material looks like. So here's my rocks and grass, and if I were to preview this node, it will show me the cliffside face. I'm going to go ahead and stop previewing here. Okay, so now we're going to do the left side, and we're basically going to make our UVWs for the landscape. And what I need here is a node called texture coordinates. COORD, coordinate. So this is going to control basically our tiling for our landscape. I'm going to drag it out here and type multiply, because we're going to multiply it by a number. And I'm going to right click on B and turn this one into a parameter, which I'm going to call tiling. Now by default, I'm going to set this default value to like 0.05. Now what we need to do is we need to plug this into the UVs of every single one of our textures. Now I could do that, and in fact I will do that, but while we're here, I will mention a thing that I really like, is we can have a thing called a named reroute node, which is basically like a little teleporter. So I can call this UV tiling. And then now this node exists, and anywhere that I put it is like this comes in this side and then pops out other places. So if I come up here and I type UV tiling, I will get this named reroute node, and I can quickly attach it to all the different UVs. Notice when you attach it, it's like it's zooming in on the texture because we're making the texture bigger. So I can take this guy and I can copy him down here and put it in each one, instead of having to drag from all the way from here down to each of these. I can just have a little exit of my wormhole. Now we can continue to change this tiling number to try to change what our materials look like, but we're actually going to make an instance of this so we can do it on the fly. So this should be all we need. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Okay, so at this point you may be tempted to throw that on the material, but we're not going to do that quite yet. I'm going to go to our terrain folder. And what we want to do is we want to right click on this guy, and we want to create a material instance. So this is our terrain master underscore instance. And this is because really easily, instead of editing in here, I can double click, and you can see here the two parameters we made, height, contrast, and tiling. I can check these on and then just drag them on the fly, which we'll see in a minute once it's on the terrain what a change that makes. So I select the landscape in my outliner, drag down till I can see landscape material, and then in my content drawer, I'm going to drag the instance over to that guy. It's this guy right here. Now, if the terrain goes black, that's fine. It means you did something right. So now we can change our mode to landscape mode. And we will change our tool here to paint. And down here we can see those terrain types we made. So it's going to continue to be black and not let us paint because what we need is layer information. So each of these is a layer, and we need to save that info somewhere. So I'm going to click a plus sign here and choose weight blended layer, and it's going to want a place to save it. And by default here, it's in the level. I'm going to put it in the terrain folder where I put the material and choose save. And as soon as I do it, we should start to see the layer in the material appear and look great. And then we need to do it for the other ones. So I'm going to do this one. Again, I'm going to put it in the same place as my material is. Weight blended layer. And finally, one more weight blended layer. Okay. So now what we can do, once you've done that with all four, you can take one of your layers. So here I'm selecting cliff, and you can use this brush, and you can paint that cliff material. And you can see I can paint the cliff onto the actual mountain. And it starts to look really good. And in fact, it looks really good where they sort of fade from one to the other, and that's where our displacement height information is coming. Let me add a couple of other materials here. Let's get some of that rock. Now, if I quickly play from here so that I can see this down here, we may find that if I had a player in here, that the scale isn't quite what I'm looking for, right? This one's got like tire tracks in it. Maybe they look super big or they look super small. Maybe the cliff needs to have different sizes. So what we can do is we can open that terrain instance. I'm going to move it over to the side so I can try to see both here. And I can literally change this tiling on the fly. So I can come in here and be like, maybe it's 0.8, and it will change the size of the material. Here it made it a little smaller, right? If I make it all the way to 1, it will be quite tiny and look ridiculous, and you can see all this repeat here. So let's do 0.08 maybe. And the height contrast has to do with how the different materials interact when they overlap each other. And as I change that number, we will see the way that they will fade through or above that bottom one. So here I am with the grass and the dirt, and if I change my height contrast, we will change the way that they interact and overlap. But 4 is pretty solid. Now finally, you could go ahead and paint. You can make your own terrain material with as many layers as you want. You come in here and put 10, 20, however many layers in here. But there is a danger. The more layers you have in the terrain material, the more textures it has to load. And at a certain point, it can't load them all, and you will get to a point where parts of your terrain are solid black. And if that's the case, what you need to do is you need to have made these materials here, sorry, these textures here, have not from sampler source texture asset, but we need to make it say shared wrap. So I'm holding control and selecting all of them at the same time. And right here for sampler source, I'm going to change it to shared wrap. And I'm going to go ahead and save. And we'll be good to apply our material to the surface. One last thing to keep in mind is that the alpha brushes that we used previously still apply here. So if I apply a cool alpha brush for painting with, it can give me less obviously circular materials to paint with so that we end up with some more organic shapes as the different shapes fade between each other.